It began with a single phone call, one that reportedly left Prince Harry stunned and Meghan in tears. After years of tension, King Charles made a move no one believed he would actually dare: the total withdrawal of financial support for Harry's children, Archie and Lilibet. But what was behind this unprecedented break? And what shocking revelation finally pushed the king over the edge? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. What was supposed to be a quiet, internal update to the royal financial registry erupted into a seismic rupture within the monarchy. Reports suggest the call came not from a private secretary or an advisor, but from Charles himself. Direct, unfiltered, icy, and final. The words were brief but brutal. Support has ceased. There was no elaboration, no negotiation, only a single-line confirmation later issued by Buckingham Palace to the press, offering nothing more than the phrase already echoing in Harry's ears. Meghan, blindsided, was said to be physically shaken after the call, describing it as devastating and deliberate in conversations with close friends. Inside the palace, sources paint a portrait of a king no longer hesitating, no longer caught in the web of familial diplomacy. They say Charles made this decision not out of anger, but out of clarity. Royal insiders say the king acted coldly, but with finality, as though a long-dreaded choice had finally crystallized into action. The question on everyone's lips wasn't just why, but why now? For years, Charles had been criticized for walking the tightrope, offering gestures of support while quietly disapproving of Harry's choices. But to target the next generation, the grandchildren, was a step no one expected. Was it symbolic, punitive, or had something surfaced, something so severe that it left the monarch with no alternative? The backlash was immediate. Commentators debated whether the move could affect Archie and Lilibet's future security, their private education, or even their right to claim inheritance later down the line. The silence from the palace, beyond that single chilling sentence, only fanned the flames. And yet, for those who have long studied the dynamics of this fractured royal bond, it felt like something more than retaliation. It felt like a statement, not just to Harry, but to the world. A declaration that bloodline alone no longer guaranteed protection. And, as the world speculated over what could justify such a scorched-earth decision, palace sources pointed to something deeply buried, tightly sealed, and only recently unearthed. But behind Charles's cold decision lies a secret dossier, a collection of private revelations that some say shattered what little trust the monarch had left. What could possibly be so damning that Charles would take such a drastic, irreversible step against his own grandchildren? According to leaked whispers from inside Clarence House, a private set of revelations, reportedly documented and verified, exposed something that left the king visibly shaken and betrayed. And it hadn't come from tabloids or hearsay. This was something far more intimate. The warning came days before the announcement, shrouded in secrecy, carried by a courier known only to a handful of palace aides. Inside, according to insiders, were transcripts, communications, and extracts from what is now widely believed to be an unpublished portion of Prince Harry's follow-up memoir, a version allegedly far more raw and explosive than the one released to the public. The timing was no coincidence. This dossier, sources say, included emails, voice memos, and confidential exchanges between Meghan and former palace staff, many of whom had since signed NDAs. The material reportedly detailed years of private tension, but the most shocking element, insiders claim, revolved around Charles's relationship with Queen Camilla. Allegations hinted at unfiltered opinions, disputed events, and emotional wounds that had been glossed over for years, laid bare in Meghan's words and Harry's reflections. But what turned this from scandal to betrayal was the suggestion that these communications had been organized and shared intentionally. Royal legal advisors were pulled in urgently, analyzing the contents in silence. Their conclusion was devastating. While not criminal, the revelations were corrosive, deeply personal, and potentially reputation-shattering. Charles didn't need a trial. He He needed to send a message. Not just to Harry and Meghan, but to those within his own walls who had allowed this information to reach his desk in the first place. The king, according to an aide who requested anonymity, paced for nearly 2 hours before making the call. His final words before the order was sent out: "No more grace, no more risk." Some believe the documents were never meant to see the light of day, that they were simply the private ventings of a couple burdened by memory. But someone ensured they did. Someone inside the monarchy, or adjacent to it, handed the king the very fuse he needed to sever what remained of the bond. And now, that same someone is quietly being watched. But what made this personal wasn't just what was revealed, it was who inside the palace helped deliver the final blow. Charles may have signed the order, but he wasn't acting alone. Sources now suggest someone close to the throne, someone long trusted, played a pivotal role in surfacing the revelations that turned the king against Harry's children. And their motive? Revenge cloaked in royal duty. Whispers inside the palace corridors speak of a senior aide, an individual who once moved seamlessly between the households of Charles, William, and Harry. For years, this aide had been regarded as a silent operator, a person who kept confidences and rarely spoke out of turn. But beneath that professional calm, it appears resentment was festering. This aide had been present during some of the most turbulent days before Harry and Meghan's departure from royal life. They had seen the breakdown, the fallout, and perhaps felt personally betrayed by the Sussexes' decision to leave not just their roles, but their ties behind. When the alleged documents began circulating behind closed doors, sensitive material pointing to private conversations and communications that could damage the monarch's public image, it wasn't just by chance that they reached Charles's hands. According to one source, this aide didn't simply stumble across the material, they delivered it directly. No intermediaries, no delay. The contents, they said, needed to be seen. Their loyalty was framed as duty to the crown, but others believe something far darker was at play. This wasn't just about protecting the monarchy, it was about making the Sussexes pay for walking away. The aide's role in the Sussex household before their exit now takes on new light. What was once viewed as professional tension is being re-examined as personal vendetta. And when Charles acted, cutting off the financial lifeline to his grandchildren, this aide was nowhere near the backlash but everywhere in the build-up. William was reportedly informed before Harry. While he did not encourage the decision, he did not stand in its way either. His silence, according to insiders, was telling. As for Queen Camilla, her response was described as tight-lipped but approving. Meghan, in private, was said to be inconsolable, not just because of what was done, but how it was done. She believed this was more than royal coldness. This was punishment, not for her actions, but for speaking truths the monarchy didn't want exposed. And the cruelest twist, that her children were used as collateral. The one line Harry swore the family would never cross had just been crossed. As trust crumbled behind palace walls, the ripple effects reached across the Atlantic, sparking a fiery reaction from Harry no one saw coming. For months, Harry stayed relatively silent, but this was different. This wasn't about titles or press coverage, this was about his children. And insiders say what followed was not just rage, but a promise of consequences that would shake the monarchy's public image once again. According to close contacts, Harry's reaction was immediate and unmistakably volcanic. As the news broke and messages poured in, his first instinct was to reach his father directly. But the call was reportedly intercepted. Charles refused to speak. No explanation, no conversation, just silence. That silence said everything. And it lit a fire in Harry that even his closest advisors hadn't seen since the days following the Sussexes' royal departure. Meghan, who had grown familiar with disappointment from the firm, reportedly crumbled in front of staff upon hearing the finality of the king's action. This time, it wasn't just about her. It wasn't even about her husband. It was about their children. The 2 young lives she had fought tooth and nail to protect from the very machinery now turning its weight against them. Within hours, Harry was in contact with his legal team. The questions weren't just about finances, they were about protections, security, titles, future inheritance. Had the move by Charles jeopardized Archie and Lilibet's legal standing within the royal framework? Were they now considered separate, stripped, untethered? Legal counsel began reviewing every document tied to previous agreements and security protocols. Meanwhile, quietly and without fanfare, Harry initiated contact with US officials. Sources claim he requested clarification on the children's standing, both in terms of personal safety and diplomatic classification. What began as a royal fallout had now crossed borders. And behind it all, the face of a father who had reached his limit. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was systemic. It came from an institution that had once promised protection, only to wield that promise as a weapon. Harry, now seething, began formulating his response. Not through traditional statements. Not through palace channels, but through something raw, closer, more piercing. Allies say he began preparing an unscheduled media appearance, one that would not follow the usual PR choreography. This time, there would be no carefully scripted segments or rehearsed answers. This was set to be personal, direct, possibly explosive. What remained uncertain was how far Harry was willing to go. Would he name names? Would he expose documents? Or would he speak directly to the one truth he'd always circled but never confronted head-on, that the palace was willing to sacrifice innocence to preserve power? The world braced. Because if Harry followed through on this vow, it wouldn't just shift the headlines, it could rip apart the monarchy's image from within. But while Harry's fury boiled over in private, a new front opened publicly, with allies and enemies taking sides in the most personal royal battle yet. Suddenly, the silence broke. Political commentators, royal analysts, and even celebrity allies began drawing lines in the sand. Some defended the king's right to draw boundaries. Others called it a disgraceful rejection of innocent children. What had once been a private feud was now a global flashpoint. The gloves were off, and what had been whispered in elite circles was now roared through headlines, television debates, and across millions of social media accounts. Overnight, hashtags like #StandWithArchie and #DefendTheHairs flooded the internet, transforming the conversation from palace politics to a moral reckoning. In living rooms across the world, people weren't just questioning the monarchy, they were questioning its soul. Could a father truly sever support from his grandchildren and still stand as a symbol of unity and grace? Royal experts found themselves in uncharted territory. For some, Charles's move was interpreted as the final nail in the coffin, an unspoken message that there would be no path back for Harry. This was not a slap on the wrist. This was exile, cemented by finance. Yet others clung to the idea that the monarch had been forced into a corner. Was this really about Charles taking a stand, or was it about someone else pressing his hand to the sword? Theories ran rampant, but the result was undeniable. The royal family had fractured in full view of the public. Public figures, too, began choosing sides. Elton John, long a friend of Diana and once a quiet supporter of Harry and Meghan, made a rare comment about the importance of protecting children from institutional coldness. Serena Williams reportedly shared a private message with Meghan expressing heartbreak and urging her to keep fighting for her family. Even royal-friendly columnists couldn't ignore the backlash. The king's silence had become deafening, and that silence, paired with the abruptness of his decision, made the move look calculated and cruel. Meanwhile, pro-monarchy commentators didn't hold back. Some accused Harry and Meghan of orchestrating sympathy by leaking details for maximum effect. They claimed the Sussexes were exploiting their children's names to garner pity and headlines. But even those criticisms felt drowned out by the central, inescapable question: why had it come to this? The palace, under siege, remained inflexible. One spokesperson refused additional comment, pointing back to the previous statement: support has ceased. But then came a chilling twist. A leaked internal briefing revealed that even Princess Anne had reportedly questioned the timing and optics of the king's move, noting that while protocol was one thing, the perception of punishing children would be impossible to defend. Anne, known for her stoicism and loyalty, expressing concern, this was a red flag. The monarchy had stumbled into unfamiliar territory, public condemnation not for scandal, but for a decision seen as striking at the heart of family. Yet amidst the noise and outrage, one question still haunted everyone. What exactly had been uncovered that forced Charles's hand so brutally? Buried deep within the royal archives, a letter was discovered, one reportedly written by Charles during the peak of the Megxit fallout. It was never meant to be read outside the family. But now, its contents are shaking the very foundation of royal compassion and exposing an inner fracture years in the making. The document, dated mid-2020, just months after Harry and Meghan's explosive departure, appears to be a raw, unfiltered stream of the then prince's thoughts. In it, he writes not as a monarch in waiting, but as a father, a conflicted, cornered man, wrestling with betrayal, duty, and fear. And at the heart of it all, one chilling line stands out. I fear access to my grandchildren may be weaponized in ways that could irreversibly damage the crown. Those 12 words have now become a flashpoint. They reveal a deeply personal worry that his own grandchildren could one day be used against him. But more than that, they suggest that the seeds of distrust were planted long before any financial decisions were made. Charles, it seems, had been preparing for this emotional detonation for years. Palace insiders confirm the letter was penned during one of the most turbulent periods in modern royal history, when headlines threatened to eclipse heritage and private phone calls turned into tabloid fodder. He never sent it. It sat in a sealed folder, locked away until someone leaked it. How Meghan came into possession of the letter is still a matter of furious speculation. Some suggest an internal palace source sympathetic to her struggle passed it along discreetly. Others claim the letter was uncovered during legal correspondence involving previous lawsuits. But regardless of how it surfaced, its impact is undeniable. It paints a portrait of a father who, even in moments of pain, was calculating the political cost of his grandchildren. And it's that tone, strategic, anxious, and at times cold, that has shattered any illusion of a united royal front. The contrast between Charles's public calls for reconciliation and the caution expressed in this letter is stark. His official speeches spoke of healing, of unbreakable family bonds. But in private, he was bracing for a war of perception, a war he believed could be waged through Archie and Lilibet. Royal aides are scrambling to control the damage, insisting the letter was merely a private reflection during a difficult time. Yet even they can't deny the timing. Just weeks after Charles cut financial support, this letter emerges like a ghost from a vault, proof that the divide wasn't a sudden reaction, but a long-anticipated fracture. Camilla's name appears only once in the letter, but that mention is telling. According to sources close to the Queen Consort, she had advised Charles to destroy the letter, fearing it could one day be used against him. He didn't listen. And now, in the wake of his most controversial move as king, the letter has resurfaced to haunt him. Not as a father hoping to protect the monarchy, but as a man who feared his own bloodline could become its undoing. But if Charles was once afraid of losing access, his latest move may have sealed that fate permanently. While Harry raged, Meghan acted. With quiet precision, she began orchestrating a new strategy, one that wouldn't just protect her children, but might alter the royal narrative forever. And those watching closely say her next move carries a silent threat: exposure. Gone were the days of public pleas and emotional interviews. This time, Meghan moved in silence, but with unmistakable purpose. Her first call, according to those close to her, was to a longtime US media ally, someone with access not only to primetime platforms, but also to the digital networks that shape global opinion in real time. The message was subtle but clear. The narrative wasn't over, not yet. Behind closed doors, Legal experts were summoned to Montecito. Contracts were reviewed, letters were drafted, and clauses from previous agreements with the royal household were scrutinized for any remaining vulnerabilities. Meghan's team began preparing what insiders now believe could be a carefully constructed open letter, not for sympathy, but as a declaration. One source described it as part warning, part manifesto, aimed squarely at the institution that, in her eyes, chose silence over protection. But that wasn't all. Quiet murmurs emerged that she had begun exploratory talks around a new media project. Not a tell-all, something more subtle, more powerful. A docuseries, perhaps, focused on the realities of motherhood in the modern royal spotlight. It wouldn't name names. It wouldn't need to. The subtext would be louder than any accusation. At the same time, the Markle Foundation quietly updated its mission statement. Gone were the vague nods to compassion and leadership. In its place, a sharp focus on children's rights, media ethics, and global advocacy for safe, familial environments. To her supporters, it was a natural evolution. To the palace, it was a warning shot. Meghan, some say, had finally shed any hope of reconciliation. Friends confirmed she was done asking for approval. No more letters behind palace walls. No more silent endurance. She was reclaiming the narrative, and by doing so, she was challenging the very idea that the monarchy could dictate how her children's story would unfold. This quiet defiance sent shockwaves through the royal corridors. Senior staff were told to prepare for another potential media firestorm. Some compared it to the lead-up to the Oprah interview, that same mounting dread that something irreversible was coming. But this time, it felt even more deliberate. If before it had been a cry for understanding, this felt like a calculated move. Not to burn bridges, but to light the path she and her children would walk, regardless of royal approval. And just as the palace scrambled to get ahead of the fallout, a sudden development shifted the tone yet again. As the monarchy braced for impact, Charles convened one final meeting this time, without Camilla or William present. For the first time since the decision, Charles was reportedly alone with his thoughts. No advisors, no family. And those who saw him said the weight of his choice had finally landed. Because beneath the crown and the justifications, he was still a grandfather. The noise of court life faded for a single day, as Charles withdrew behind the thick walls of his private residence, cancelling meetings with diplomats, and even a scheduled appearance with the Archbishop. Those who passed by noted the rare absence of movement, the stillness of a man no longer surrounded by protocol but consumed by the echo of what he'd done. Gone was the assertive monarch who had signed off on the most shocking decision of his reign. In his place stood a man haunted, hollowed, unsure. The corridors whispered of a king grappling not with political fallout, but with personal loss. Reports from long-serving aides described him as distracted, slow to respond, eyes fixed not on the present, but on something unseen. Perhaps it was the voice of Archie, once heard giggling in palace gardens. Perhaps the imagined question from Lilibet, someday asking why her name was the one erased. Either way, insiders say the questions circling in Charles's mind had shifted from public opinion to private reckoning. Would this moment, this one cold final act, be what defined his reign? Would it be remembered not as a necessary line in the sand, but as a scar etched into the family name? Behind closed doors, whispers tell of a document never sent, never spoken of, allegedly penned in the dead of night. A letter to Harry. Not an apology, perhaps, but something close. A gesture, a reaching out. The language was said to be cautious, conflicted, even emotional. But that letter never left the room. Whether out of pride or fear, Charles folded it away. As morning broke, senior advisors attempted to reorient the king's focus, suggesting a carefully worded statement to the press, a clarification to soothe public fury. But Charles, in his rare moment of obstinance, refused. He would not explain himself. He would not dilute the choice he had made, even if the weight of it now sat heavy on his chest. Because the truth was no longer just about power, titles, or protocol. It was about legacy, a legacy teetering between duty and regret. Those closest to him began to wonder aloud if Charles, despite the armour of kingship, had miscalculated not just the public's reaction, but his own emotional threshold. And yet, in the quiet of that solitary day, no royal decree could undo what had been set in motion. And while the king sat with his silence, the final consequence of his decision was already unfolding this time, far beyond his control. In cutting off Archie and Lilibet, Charles didn't just end a payment plan, he may have severed the final thread holding his family together. Because once the heirs of tomorrow become symbols of exclusion today, the monarchy doesn't just look cold, it looks outdated. The ripple effect was undeniable. Within hours of the news breaking, online discourse erupted. But what emerged wasn't just outrage, it was disillusionment. Younger generations across the Commonwealth voiced something more dangerous than anger: indifference. For decades, the monarchy survived criticism. But this felt different. This felt like erosion, a crumbling of public sentiment that no jubilee or carefully staged engagement could restore. In both the United Kingdom and the United States, polling data began painting a bleak picture. Sympathy for Harry and Meghan, long derided in British press, suddenly spiked among younger audiences. It wasn't about whether one agreed with their choices, it was about a new question entirely. Why are innocent children being punished for palace politics? Archie and Lilibet, once shadowed by controversies not of their making, were now seen as the face of a deeper generational divide. Their removal from royal support, especially amid global concerns about security and equality, began to reflect something larger, a system unable to evolve, even in the face of its most fragile truths. Even inside palace walls, that shift was acknowledged. Behind closed doors, aides admitted that optics had taken a catastrophic hit. Royal correspondents, usually loyal to the institution, began publishing uncharacteristically harsh analyses. Some openly suggested this may be the moment that hastens the long-theorized unraveling of the monarchy, not with a loud rebellion, but with a quiet turning away. A generation of citizens growing up not dreaming of royal weddings, but questioning why the crown still matters at all. And ironically, in trying to assert control, the crown may have triggered its own retreat from relevance. What startled many was William's response or lack thereof. Insiders say he was visibly unsettled, not just by the backlash, but by the long-term impact it could have on his own children. If the institution could exclude Archie and Lilibet now, what would stop it from turning cold on George, Charlotte, or Louis in another chapter of discontent? For a future king, this wasn't just about succession, it was about stability, and the look in his eyes, one source noted, was not of triumph, but of quiet dread. He had always been the bridge between tradition and modernity, but now, that bridge looked more like a tightrope. And then came the final twist, the whisper that Harry, in private conversations with legal advisors, had begun exploring the possibility of removing his children's royal titles altogether. A full, deliberate severing, not as a form of rebellion, but as an act of protection, a way to ensure his children wouldn't grow up shackled to an institution that viewed them as optional. The potential move stunned even Meghan's inner circle, because in doing so, Harry wasn't just rejecting the crown, he was freeing his children from its grasp. And in that single choice, the image of the royal family as an unbroken lineage flickered, fragile, exposed, and suddenly more human than ever. As history prepares to judge the king's actions, one question remains. Was the crown protected, or was it quietly broken, forever? Thanks for watching, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.